Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The night was heavy over the riverlands, thick with fog and the stench of wet earth. Harrenhal rose from the mists like a burnt crown, its blackened towers jagged against the moonlight. There, beneath its broken battlements, the sound of a dragon's breath rumbled through the dark, deep and dreadful, like the growl of the gods themselves. Vhagar, the she-dragon of old Valyria, slept uneasily in the courtyard, her vast wings folded like shrouds over her sides. Her scales shimmered faintly in the torchlight, a dull silver green that caught every flicker of flame. Even asleep, she radiated power. And something more dangerous still. Prince Aemond Targaryen stood at the highest window of Harrenhal's tallest surviving tower, his single eye fixed upon the lands below. The other socket, sealed with a sapphire that caught the moon, gleamed with cold fire. His pale hair stirred in the night wind, and the faintest trace of a smile curved his lips, though it was not one of peace. Lucerys Velaryon was dead, his dragon torn apart above Shipbreaker Bay, his body lost to the sea. The memory should have satisfied him, should have stilled the fire in his chest. But it did not. Vengeance, he whispered to the night, the word falling like frost upon the air, and yet the flame burns hotter still. Behind him, a log cracked in the hearth. The hall was vast and near empty, save for a few guards and a cluster of Riverlord's men who feared him more than they served. The lords of Harrenhal had long since fled or bent the knee, and now the great ruin belonged to the Dragon Prince, a haunted fortress for a haunted man. It was said that no Targaryen could dwell long in Harrenhal without ill fortune. The curse of House Strong lingered there, but Aemond laughed at curses, or so he had, until the whispers began. They came at night, soft as the rustle of silk. At first, he thought them dreams. Then, he began to hear them when he was awake. Faint voices behind him when the halls were empty, murmurs from the shadows when he walked the ramparts. Kin's blood calls for kin's blood. Silver flame feeds silver flame. You are the doom of your line. He told himself it was nothing, the wind through broken stone, the trick of an unsettled mind. But the more he dismissed them, the louder they grew. On the 5th night after his arrival, he dreamed of fire, not the wild blaze of battle, but a cold, silvery fire that burned without warmth. From its heart rose figures, shapes of dragons, of men with eyes like molten metal, of shadows screaming wordless names. One face emerged among them, his own, reflected in a rippling pool of flame. When he woke, the hearth had burned out, yet the room was filled with a strange pale light. His sword, Dark Sister, lay drawn beside him, though he did not remember unsheathing it. That morning, his men found 2 of the kitchen servants gone, vanished without trace. One of them had been seen wandering near Vhagar's lair before dawn. Another claimed to have heard the dragon hiss in her sleep, as though dreaming of blood. By the next evening, Aemond rode out across the riverlands with a host at his back, his heart thundering with purpose. The Queen's war demanded his hand, and war, he thought, would quiet the ghosts that whispered his name. But the Riverlords had learned to fear dragons. Villages emptied before him. Men fled to the woods. Women prayed to the Seven and left offerings by the roadside. Bits of silver, iron charms, strands of hair. Once, such gestures would have amused him. Now, as he passed them, he felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. That night, he camped beside a ruined sept. The moonlight fell upon the altar within, cracked and blackened by fire. Aemond stood before it, the smell of ash and wet stone filling his lungs. He meant to offer a prayer, though he could not say to whom. Then he saw it. Upon the altar lay a coin, old, thin, and tarnished, a dragon's head stamped upon one side. When he turned it over, he found words carved roughly into the stone beneath. The silver curse comes for all who spill kin's blood beneath the dragon's flame. He stared at the message for a long while, until the wind rose and snuffed out the torch in his hand. When the flame died, he thought he saw something move in the shadows beyond the doorway, a shape like a woman's form, pale and glimmering, her hair flowing like silver smoke. She did not speak, but her gaze pierced through him, cold as moonlight on steel. Aemond's hand went to his sword, but before he could draw it, she was gone, leaving only the echo of her presence and the faint scent of dragon fire on the air. He did not sleep again that night. When dawn broke, the men found their prince already mounted on Vhagar, her wings unfurling against the sun. His sapphire eye caught the light like a shard of ice. There is no curse, he told himself as they rose into the sky. Only power, and those too weak to seize it. But far below, in the mists that curled around the black stones of Harrenhal, a whisper followed in his wake, faint and full of promise. Then power shall be your curse, Silver Prince. The morning after their flight, the riverlands lay spread beneath them. Green fields turned to mud, rivers choked with mist, and villages that burned like dying embers in the dawn. Aemond Targaryen rode Vhagar high above the clouds, her great wings cutting through the air with the sound of thunder. Each beat of her wings stirred the world below, scattering crows from the trees and driving men to their knees in fear. He had always felt most alive in the sky. From up here, the petty squabbles of lords and soldiers meant nothing. Only the wind, the fire, and the ancient pulse of his dragon mattered. Yet even in flight, a shadow clung to him, an unseen chill that no sun could banish. When they descended upon the town of Duskendale 2 days later, Aemond's host met little resistance. The men of the Vale had retreated eastward, leaving only a token guard. He gave the order to take the town, swiftly, without waste. But when his men hesitated, eyeing the civilians who knelt in the square, Aemond's temper flared. "Mercy is weakness," he said coldly, his sapphire eye gleaming. "Do not let them think a dragon's favor can be bought with tears." By nightfall, the streets were littered with the dead. Flames licked the rooftops, painting the sky with fire. Vhagar's roars shook the very stones, and Aemond watched in silence, his face lit by the burning town. Yet the victory brought him no joy. That night, as he slept in the castle hall, he dreamed again of the woman, the one he had seen at the ruined sept. She stood at the edge of a great lake, her hair gleaming like liquid silver, her eyes black as the abyss. "You burn the world to fill the void within," she said, her voice like the whisper of water over stone. "But the fire shall turn upon you, son of the dragon." Aemond reached for his sword, but his hand met nothing. The ground beneath him rippled like water, and he saw his reflection staring back. Not his face, but something twisted, its mouth curling into a cruel smile. He woke with a gasp, his sheets damp with sweat. The hall was empty, save for the dying embers in the hearth. He rose, pacing before the fire. "There is no curse," he muttered, gripping his sword hilt. "Only war, only duty." But as he spoke, the flames leapt higher, silver white for an instant, and within them, he thought he saw wings. At dawn, a rider came bearing news from the south. Sir Criston Cole and the Queen's armies were marching to meet him. His mother's side of the war demanded that he strike at the Trident, cutting off Rhaenyra's allies before they reached King's Landing. He welcomed the summons. Perhaps the blood of his enemies would drown the unease that haunted him. The march south was swift and ruthless. Villages surrendered before he arrived, and those who resisted were burned. The men followed him with a mixture of awe and fear. They called him Aemond One-Eye, the Kinslayer, the Lord of Death on wings. One night, while camped beside the river Tumblestone, he called for food and drink to be brought to his tent. The serving girl who entered was young, with pale hair and eyes like quicksilver, so strikingly unlike the brown-eyed Riverlanders that Aemond paused. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Mera," she said softly. "My mother was of Lys, my father of no account." She poured his wine, her hand steady, her expression calm. But as she turned to leave, Aemond caught a glint of something at her throat, a small silver pendant shaped like a dragon's eye. "Where did you get that?" he asked sharply. She froze. "It was my mother's," she said. "She said it brings protection." Aemond's gaze lingered on her. The amulet seemed to shimmer faintly in the candlelight, as though alive. That night, he dreamt of her face, but not as he had seen it. In his dream, she stood over him, the pendant glowing bright as moonlight, her eyes reflecting the silver fire that haunted his sleep. "You cannot escape what you are," she whispered. "The curse is not upon you. It is within you." He woke to find her gone. No one in the camp remembered her, and none could recall her face. Only the pendant remained, lying upon his pillow where her hands had been. Aemond took it up, intending to cast it into the fire, but when his fingers closed around it, he felt a pulse, faint but steady, like the beat of a dragon's heart. He hesitated, then tucked it into his cloak. The next day, they reached the Blackwater Rush. There, word came that Prince Daemon had been sighted near Harrenhal, the rogue prince, his uncle, his rival in both war and blood. Aemond's jaw tightened. Daemon. The name was a wound that never closed. If there was any man he longed to face, it was him, the warrior, whose shadow had loomed over his every victory, whose dragon Caraxes had once nearly matched Vaegar's might. The thought of their meeting quickened his pulse. "Prepare to ride," he told his men. "We return to Harrenhal." The soldiers murmured among themselves, uneasy at the thought of returning to that cursed place. But none dared refuse. That evening, as Vaegar soared toward the smoking towers, the wind howled across the ruins, carrying with it a sound that might have been laughter. Aemond heard it faintly, just as he had before. A voice in the dark, soft and mocking. "Back to where it began, Silver Prince. Back to the fire that birthed you." He landed in the courtyard at dusk. The castle was as he had left it. Broken walls, blackened stone, and the smell of old death. Yet something in the air had changed, heavier, colder, as though the ruin itself waited for him. As he walked through the great hall, torches flickering on the walls, he heard footsteps echoing behind him. He turned, but saw no one. Then a whisper brushed his ear. "The blood of the dragon is no gift. It is a chain." He drew his sword. The blade gleamed red in the firelight. "Show yourself," he growled. From the shadows by the dais, a figure emerged. A woman cloaked in gray, her hair glimmering silver white, her eyes calm and ancient. "You seek to end the curse," she said. "But the curse is you, Aemond Targaryen." Her voice stirred something deep within him, not fear, but recognition. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I am the memory your line forgot," she said, "the fire that devours its own." The air trembled, and the torches burned silver white. Outside, Vhagar roared, and the walls of Harrenhal shuddered as though the castle itself drew breath. Aemond took a step forward, his sword raised high. "Then I shall burn the memory from the world," he said, but even as he spoke, the woman smiled, and the silver fire leapt from the walls, swallowing the hall in blinding light. When the silver fire faded, Aemond found himself kneeling upon cold stone. The torches of Harrenhal had guttered out, leaving only a pale light that seeped through the broken roof. The woman was gone. In her place, the air shimmered faintly, as though the walls themselves still remembered her presence. He rose unsteadily, sword in hand, the echo of her words still ringing in his mind. "The curse is you, Aemond Targaryen." Outside, Vhagar stirred restlessly, her roars shaking the ground. The soldiers in the courtyard looked up in terror as the dragon's wings unfurled, blotting out the stars. Aemond stepped into the open air, his cloak snapping in the wind. "Peace, old girl," he murmured. "It was only a dream." But even as he spoke, he felt the falseness of the words. Dreams did not burn so bright, nor leave the smell of ash in one's hair. Aemond ordered the men to remain in the lower halls and went alone to the tower that overlooked the God's Eye. From there, he could see the vast black lake stretching into the distance, the moon mirrored upon its still waters. It was said that sorcery once slept beneath those depths, old Valyrian magic or worse. Tonight, the surface glimmered faintly, as though it remembered fire. He stared into it for a long time. His reflection wavered there, the sapphire in his eye shining like a fallen star. For an instant, he thought he saw another face staring back at him, not his own, but Daemon's, older and crueler, with a knowing smile. The vision vanished as quickly as it came. Aemond clenched his fists. He would not be haunted by shadows, nor by ghosts of his blood. By dawn, he gave the order to march again. They would not linger here. His mother's cause demanded his sword at the trident, and word had come that Daemon was gathering allies in secret. If the rogue prince wished to test him, he would find Aemond ready. 3 days they rode, and in those days the prince neither slept nor smiled. His dreams were filled with silver light and dragonfire. Each time he closed his eye, he saw wings spread across the sky, vast and terrible. Sometimes it was Vhagar, sometimes it was himself. On the third night, they camped by a ruined holdfast near the river. The men huddled close to their fires, whispering of strange omens. Horses gone lame without cause, food spoiling in the sacks, and the faint scent of smoke even when no fire burned. Aemond walked apart from them, the silver pendant heavy in his palm. He could not bring himself to throw it away. Each time he tried, something in him resisted, as though the trinket were bound to him by unseen thread. That night, a soft voice spoke from behind him. "You should have heeded her warning." He turned, hand to his sword. It was Sir Gawain Hightower, his uncle by blood, and one of the few men who dared address him plainly. The knight's face was drawn and tired. "You speak in riddles, uncle," Aemond said coldly. "Not riddles. Caution." Gawain's gaze fell upon the pendant. "The men whisper that the Witch of the River follows you, that she marks you as cursed." Aemond's mouth twisted. "Let them whisper. The weak always fear what they do not understand." "Perhaps," Gawain said softly, "but even the strong should know when the gods are watching." Aemond turned away, Unwilling to hear more, he walked to the edge of the river where the moonlight touched the water. The night was silent, save for the distant croak of frogs and the faint hum of insects. He let the pendant dangle from his fingers, the metal catching the light. "What are you?" he whispered to it. "A warning or a chain?" The water rippled in answer, though no wind stirred. From the depths below, something shimmered, a pale light moving just beneath the surface. He leaned closer, and for an instant, he saw eyes staring up at him, silver and bright. Then the water went still. He did not sleep again that night. By morning, Sir Gawain was dead. His tent had burned in the night, the fire spreading too fast to be natural. The men swore they saw no spark, no ember, yet the blaze devoured everything within moments. When they dragged what was left of him from the ashes, his flesh was untouched, only his armor melted to silver slag. Aemond stood over the remains in silence. The men crossed themselves and whispered prayers. "Bury him," Aemond said quietly, "and tell no tales." But tales never die, not in war. By sunset, the whispers had changed. The men said their prince was cursed indeed, that his dragon carried the fire of demons, that death followed where he slept. When they reached the river crossing at Derry, half the camp deserted before dawn. The captains begged Aemond to pursue them, but he only shook his head. "Let them run," he said. "The curse will not spare cowards." That night, he mounted Vhagar again. The dragon's scales glowed faintly beneath the moon, and her eyes burned like twin furnaces. As they rose into the sky, the earth fell away beneath them, and the night opened wide. He flew without purpose, letting the wind guide him. Below, the forests and fields passed in shadowed blur. Far ahead, he saw the faint shimmer of the God's Eye once more. Something drew him back there. Not strategy, not duty, but a pull deep within his blood. The woman's words echoed again. "The curse is within you." When he landed upon the shores of the great lake, mist coiled around Vhagar's claws. The ruins of Harrenhal loomed across the water, dark and watchful. He dismounted and stood at the edge of the lake, the pendant cold against his skin. "Show yourself," he called into the mist. "If you are real, if any of this is truth, then come before me." For a long while, there was only silence. Then the water stirred. From its depths, a pale light rose, spreading outward in ripples. The surface broke, and the woman stepped forth. She was as he remembered her. Silver hair, eyes dark as void. Her feet touched the water as though it were solid glass. "You have come to the heart of your curse," she said, "and still you deny it." Aemond's hand tightened on his sword. "Tell me what you are." "I am the fire your ancestors stole," she said. "I am the memory of what you were meant to fear. Every dragon's flame bears my breath." "Lies," he hissed, but she only smiled. "Then prove it false." The air trembled, and from the mist behind her rose shapes, figures of silver flame, the ghosts of dragons long dead. They circled her like a crown, their roars echoing across the lake. Vhagar answered, rearing and bellowing in defiance. Her wings beat against the wind, shaking the trees. Aemond felt the pull in his blood, the same call that had driven every Targaryen to madness or glory. He mounted her once more, his heart pounding. "Fire calls to fire," the woman said, her voice rising like thunder. "Let the silver curse be fulfilled." And as Vhagar leapt into the sky, the lake erupted below, silver flames spreading across the water like living light. The heavens themselves seemed to shatter with the sound of her wings. Aemond laughed, wild, fierce, and unbroken. For in that moment he felt no fear, no curse, only the power that burned in his veins. Above the god's eye, the storm gathered. Below, the woman watched in silence, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and inevitability. The curse had begun to wake. The sky above the god's eye split with thunder. Vhagar's wings drove through the storm, vast enough to blot out the moon. Rain fell in silver sheets, hissing where it met her scales. Lightning flashed, turning her teeth to daggers of fire. Aemond clung to the saddle, soaked to the bone, his sapphire eye gleaming through the downpour. The wind roared in his ears, but beneath its fury, he heard the whisper still, that same cold, familiar voice. The curse is within you. He tried to drown it with speed, urging Vhagar higher, higher, until the clouds swallowed them whole. Above the storm, the night was quiet. The world below was a sea of black mist, and the stars shone sharp as blades. "Do you hear them, old girl?" he whispered to his dragon. "The world trembles. Even the gods fear us now." Vhagar rumbled, a sound that might have been pride or warning. Her ancient heart burned with the memory of countless battles, and Aemond felt the pulse of it through his own. Man and dragon, bound by flame and blood. But below, the silver light upon the lake began to change. It spread outward in slow ripples, glowing brighter with every breath. The rain turned to steam where it touched, rising like ghosts from the water's surface. Then the mist took form. Wings, talons, and the long sinuous neck of a dragon wrought from pure light. It rose silently, immense and ethereal, eyes like molten moonstone. Aemond's breath caught in his throat. This was no mortal creature. It was something older, greater, a vision of the dragons that once flew over Valyria before the doom. Vhagar bellowed a challenge, her roar tearing through the storm. The apparition answered in silence, yet its presence filled the air with a pressure that made the world tremble. The woman's voice came again, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "You are the last flame of a dying fire, Aemond Targaryen. The curse is your inheritance, the price of your blood's ambition. Then let my inheritance burn," he snarled. "If I am cursed, I shall be the curse made flesh." He drove Vhagar downward, spear-like, toward the shining phantom. The air screamed around them as they fell, the storm breaking beneath their descent. Vhagar's jaws opened wide, fire building in her throat, a fire that could turn castles to ash. But when her flame met the silver dragon's light, it did not consume. It twisted, folded inward, and turned white. The world vanished in brilliance. For a heartbeat, Aemond saw everything. Valyria before its fall, dragons soaring over molten rivers, kings crowned in blood and fire. He saw his ancestors, proud and mad, their eyes shining with the same silver hunger. And among them, he saw himself, a boy with one eye and too much pride, standing on the edge of a precipice. Then the vision shattered. He was falling, the wind ripping at his cloak. Vhagar roared beneath him, fighting to steady her wings. The phantom was gone. The storm was gone. Only the burning light upon the lake remained, now coiling upward like a vast serpent of flame. Aemond pulled hard on the reins, forcing Vhagar back into the clouds. His heart thundered in his chest, and for the first time in years, he felt something he could not name. Not fear, but the faint, terrible sense that he was no longer master of his own fate. When they landed upon the black shore once more, the world was quiet. The lake steamed, its surface smooth as glass. Aemond dismounted, his boots sinking into the wet earth. His men had not followed. The storm had driven them miles away, leaving only the prince and his dragon in the silence of ruin. He turned to the water. The The silver light had faded, but its reflection still lingered in his mind. He felt it pulsing behind his eye, a faint throb that matched the beat of his heart. Then, from the shadows of the ruined tower, came a flicker of movement. He drew his sword. "Show yourself." A figure stepped forward, cloaked, hooded, but human. Not the spectral woman this time, but something flesh and blood. The figure lowered its hood, revealing a young man's face, pale and sharp, with the unmistakable look of Valyrian blood. His hair was silver white, his eyes violet. "Who are you?" Aemond demanded. The stranger bowed slightly. "A friend, if you will have one. A servant of truth, if you will hear it." "Truth?" Aemond's lip curled. "I have had enough of riddles and ghosts." "Then hear a plain word, Prince of the Flame," the man said. "You are not haunted by a curse. You are hunted by your own blood." Aemond frowned. "Speak plainly." "The Targaryen line?" the stranger said softly. "It is not merely men who carry it, but the fire itself, an ancient will that seeks dominion. You think you ride your dragon, but you are mistaken. The dragons ride you." Aemond laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "Madness." "Is it?" the man asked. "Look to your beast. Do you command her still?" Aemond turned and froze. Vhagar stood motionless by the water's edge, her head lowered, but her eyes burned with silver flame, not the red gold of dragonfire, but the same ghostly hue that had haunted his dreams. She looked at him, and in that gaze there was no obedience, only power, ancient, endless, and alive. The stranger stepped closer. "Do you see now? You and she are bound not by choice, but by the fire that remembers. The curse is the bond itself, the unbroken chain that began in Valyria and will end only in ashes." "Why tell me this?" Aemond asked, his voice low. "Because your doom nears, and I would see if you are worthy of it." Before Aemond could reply, the stranger vanished. One blink, and the space where he had stood was empty. The prince stood alone, the rain beginning once more to fall. He sheathed his sword slowly, his jaw clenched. His mind reeled with fury, at the witch, at the stranger, at himself. He turned to Vhagar and mounted, his voice sharp as steel. "We are one, you and I. Let none tell me otherwise." Vhagar's great wings unfurled, scattering water in a roar of wind. She took to the air, rising above the lake. Lightning forked across the sky, and for an instant, the two of them seemed carved from fire and storm, terrible and beautiful. But as they rose, Aemond felt it again. The pull in his chest, the heartbeat that was not his own. The dragon's mind pressed against his, vast and ancient, filled with memories of fire and death. And then, through that bond, he heard the woman's voice once more, cold as the grave. "The fire you command will be the fire that ends you." The storm closed around them, swallowing prince and dragon alike. Far below, the god's eyes shimmered faintly, as if reflecting not the sky, but the future. When dawn broke over the god's eye, it came in shades of gray. The storm had spent its fury, but the air was still heavy with the scent of rain and smoke. Aemond stood upon the battlements of Harrenhal once more, his silver hair damp with mist. Below him, Vhagar lay curled in the courtyard, wings folded like an ancient cloak. Her great head rested upon the stones, but her eyes did not close. They burned still with that unnatural light. He could not forget the sight. The memory of her gaze haunted him, the power in it, the knowledge. He had spent the night pacing the tower, unable to rest, unable to think of aught else. When he closed his eye, he saw the silver fire still, the reflection of himself within it, blurred and shifting, as if the flame were beginning to see through him. He told himself it was exhaustion. The war, the endless flight, the strain of command, all had taken their toll. But the lie grew thin. By mid-morning, his captains gathered in the hall. They spoke of strategy, the movements of demons' forces, the growing unrest in the Riverlands, the uncertain loyalties of the Freys and Brackens. Aemond listened, his gaze distant, his fingers tracing the rim of the silver pendant that hung at his throat. Sir Alfred Broom cleared his throat. "Your Grace," he said cautiously, "some men whisper that Harrenhal is cursed, that the air here makes men dream of things best left forgotten. Perhaps we should—" Aemond's voice cut through him like a blade. "The weak speak of curses, the strong make their own fate." The room fell silent. The captains exchanged uneasy glances. None dared answer. When they dispersed, Aemond remained alone. The hall felt larger when empty, every whisper of wind a reminder of those who had died within its walls. He walked to the great hearth at its center, where a small fire smoldered, casting a faint red glow upon the blackened stones. As he stared into the embers, something moved within them, not the flicker of flame, but the shape of a face, ghostly and pale. It was his own. The mouth of the reflection moved, though no sound came. Then, faintly, a whisper reached his ear. "The dragon's fire feeds upon itself." He recoiled, drawing his sword in an instant. The reflection vanished. Only the dull glow of coals remained. For a long moment, Aemond stood motionless. Then, with a snarl, he struck the hearth with his blade, scattering the embers. Sparks hissed and died upon the stone. The door creaked behind him. "Still fighting shadows, my prince," came a woman's voice, smooth, quiet, and cruelly familiar. He turned sharply. The woman from the lake stood in the doorway, her cloak dripping with rain. Her eyes caught the light, dark and deep as the water that birthed her. "You again," Aemond said, his tone low and dangerous. "Are you spirit or sorceress?" She stepped forward, her feet silent on the stone. "Names are for mortals. I am what your house once served, and what it will serve again." "I serve none but myself," he said. She smiled faintly. "So said your forebears before the doom consumed them." Her words struck him like a blow. The doom of Valyria, the cataclysm that ended the mightiest empire the world had ever known. He had heard the tales since childhood, mountains bursting like furnaces, skies filled with dragons falling in flame. "You mean to frighten me with children's stories," Aemond said coldly. "Stories," she repeated, her voice soft. "You call them that because you cannot bear the truth. The doom was no accident of fire and earth. It was the same curse that now takes root in you." He stepped closer, sword in hand. "Speak plainly, or I will see how mortal your flesh truly is." The woman's gaze did not waver. "You Targaryens bound dragons to your will, but dragons were never meant to be bound. Their fire is the same that devoured Valyria. It sleeps in your veins, prince, waiting for the day when your pride will wake it." Aemond's grip tightened. "Then let it wake. I was born of that fire." She regarded him for a long moment, and there was sorrow in her eyes. So was every tyrant that ever burned the world. Then she was gone. No sound, no step, only the faint scent of ash where she had stood. Aemond stared at the empty space, his heart hammered in his chest, not from fear, but from fury. He stormed from the hall and strode into the courtyard where Vhagar waited. The dragon's eyes followed him, glimmering faintly even in daylight. "You are mine," he said aloud, gripping the saddle. "You will obey." The beast tilted her head, her gaze ancient and unreadable. For an instant, he thought he saw understanding, pity even. Then, without warning, she loosed a low growl, deep and resonant. The ground quivered beneath his boots. Her wings spread, casting the courtyard into shadow. Aemond reached for the reins, but Vhagar turned away, facing the lake beyond the walls. The sound that came from her throat was not rage, but mourning. A keening cry that carried across the water, echoing through the ruined halls of Harrenhal. The prince stood frozen. Never had she defied him. Never had she looked upon him without recognition. He called her name once, twice. Still, she did not move. When the cry faded, she lowered her head slowly, as though listening to something far away. Then Aemond heard it too, a faint sound from the distance, a dragon's roar, faint but clear, carried by the wind. He knew that voice. Caraxes, demon's beast. The sound struck through him like lightning. Rage swallowed every thought, every doubt, every whisper of fear. So it ends, he said quietly. At last. He mounted Vhagar, the old dragon rising with a shudder that sent dust raining from the battlements. Her wings unfurled, vast enough to darken the ground. As they rose into the gray sky, the wind tore at his hair and cloak. Below, the black waters of the God's Eye shimmered faintly, reflecting both man and beast. Twin flames bound by the same curse. Ahead, far to the south, thunder rolled. Somewhere beyond that storm waited Demon Targaryen, his uncle, his rival, his mirror. Aemond's eye burned with cold fire. His voice was a whisper lost to the wind. Blood for blood. Vhagar roared, and they vanished into the clouds, leaving only the echo of their fury, and the faint, mocking whisper that drifted after them from the depths of Harrenhal. The curse flies with you, Silver Prince. The sky above the Trident was heavy with storm clouds. Aemond Targaryen flew at their heart, Vhagar's wings tearing through the wind, the old dragon's scales glistening with rain. Each thunderclap felt like the beating of war drums. Lightning split the heavens, illuminating the land below. Broken fields, blackened woods, the wreckage of burned villages. He was close now. The scouts had spoken true. Demon Targaryen had taken the fortress at Harrenhal once more, claiming it in the name of his false queen. The thought filled Aemond with a fierce and terrible joy. The long chase, the whispers, the curse, all of it would end in fire. For days, he had hunted the rogue prince. Each morning he woke with blood on his tongue and the echo of silver wings in his dreams. Each night, he felt the pull of fate tighten around him. The closer he came to Demon, the stronger it grew, a cord woven of fire and madness. Vhagar's breath steamed in the cold air. Below them stretched the God's Eye, vast and still as glass. The lake mirrored the storm clouds above, dark and endless. On its distant shore, a small island lay cloaked in mist, the Isle of Faces, where the old gods still lingered. Aemond's gaze lingered there for an instant, drawn by some unseen power. Then a roar answered his thoughts. Far off, beyond the mists, another dragon cut through the clouds. Blood-red scales flashed in the lightning's glare, wings vast as a crimson banner. Caraxes, Demon was waiting. Aemond's lips curled into a grim smile. At last, he whispered. Vhagar roared in answer, her ancient voice shaking the heavens. She knew, as he did, that this flight would be her last. The fire that burned within her bones was older than kingdoms, older than the world men ruled. Now it rose once more, hungry for its final blaze. The two dragons met above the God's Eye, their roars mingling with the thunder. The storm howled around them as they circled, predator facing predator. For a moment, there was only the beating of wings, the flash of lightning on silver and red. Then Daemon's voice carried across the wind. "Nephew," he called, the word almost lost in the gale. "You've hunted me long enough. Shall we end this dance?" Aemond drew his sword, the sapphire in his eye burning like a star. "Aye," he shouted back, "let the gods judge us." The dragons collided with the sound of a world breaking. Fire and storm became one. Vaegar's jaws snapped at Carax's neck, and the red beast shrieked in fury, his talons raking her flank. The air filled with smoke and flame as they tore at each other, each blow shaking the sky. Below, the lake churned, waves rising higher than ships. Aemond clung to his saddle, his blood singing with fury. He struck downward, Dark Sister gleaming in his hand. Across from him, Daemon's eyes met his, cold, unflinching, filled with that same cursed fire that ran through their blood. "You are your father's son," Daemon shouted, his voice grim and calm amid the chaos, "and his doom as well." The words stung deeper than any blade. Aemon drove Dark Sister forward, but the old warrior was faster. Daemon rose in his seat, unbound by fear, and leapt across the gap between the dragons. Steel flashed. Aemond felt the sharp bite of metal at his neck, then the rush of wind and fire as the world turned over itself. The dragons screamed, locked together, tumbling downward through the clouds. Vaegar's tail lashed out, striking Carax's wing, but the red dragon held on, his jaws closing on her throat. The two beasts crashed through the storm like falling stars, trailing fire as they fell. The lake rose to meet them. Aemon's last sight was of Daemon's face before him, calm as ever, eyes bright with madness and glory. Then there was only water and flame, silver and red mingling as the dragons struck the god's eye with a sound like thunder made flesh. The shock of it shattered the storm. For a moment, the sky burned silver white, and then darkness swallowed all. When the light faded, the lake was still again. The rain hissed against its surface, and the mists closed over the place where the dragons had fallen. For days afterward, the peasants along the shore spoke of strange lights beneath the water, glimmers of red and silver deep in the lake's heart. Some said they saw wings moving far below, vast and slow, as if the dragons still circled one another in death. But the tale did not end there. On the third night, when the storm finally broke, the water at the lake's center began to glow once more. Pale silver fire rippled across the surface, spreading outward like a living thing. The fishermen who watched from the banks crossed themselves and fled, for they swore they heard a voice, soft, cold, and inhuman, rising from the depths. The curse is fulfilled. The fire sleeps again. In the ruins of Harrenhal, the torches guttered and died. The men who remained there woke screaming from dreams of dragons and drowning. When dawn came, they found the great hall blackened by soot, though no fire had burned. Upon the stone where Aemond had once stood, a mark had been seared, a dragon's eye, bright and silver, still warm to the touch. Vaegar's carcass was never found. Carax's half-drowned body washed ashore days later, his bones shattered, but his head raised as if still defiant. Of Aemond, there was no sign. Some said the prince was devoured by his dragon. Others swore he had sunk to the lake's bottom, where the fire of Valyria would keep him whole. Yet there were those who whispered darker things. Travelers at night spoke of a figure seen upon the shore when the moon was full. A man in silver armor, one eye burning blue, his hair floating about him as if in water. He did not speak, nor breathe, nor cast a shadow. The Riverlanders called him the Silver Curse. They said that when the moon turned red, he would rise again, riding his dragon from beneath the lake to bring fire upon the living. Whether the tale was truth or madness, no maester could say. Yet sometimes on quiet nights, when the wind blew from the south and the god's eye lay smooth as glass, the surface of the water shimmered with pale light, and from its depths came the faint sound of wings. Thus ended the tale of Aemond Targaryen, prince of the dragon's blood, the kinslayer, the cursed, the storm's last child. His vengeance scorched the world, and his fall became legend. Yet the fire that burned within him did not die, for in the hearts of men who dream of power, the Silver Curse still sleeps, waiting for another name, another crown, another fool who believes he can master the flame. Years passed over the Riverlands like dust upon a forgotten tomb. The dance of the dragons ended, kings rose and fell, and still the lake lay silent. The god's eye had claimed Aemond Targaryen, and the songs of his fall grew into legend, sung by soldiers, whispered by maesters, and feared by children who dreamed of dragons in the dark. But legends in Westeros have long roots. Some grow into truth. One autumn evening, decades after the war had ended, a company of rivermen came upon the ruins of Harrenhal. The great castle stood black and hollow against the dying sun, its towers scarred and twisted by ancient fire. None lived there now. Even the crows avoided the place, circling wide when they passed above its broken walls. Yet the men had heard a rumor that treasure lay hidden still beneath its stones, the spoils of the Black Heron kings, or perhaps gold once carried by a dragonlord. Their captain was a hard man named Sir Harwin Pike, a knight-turned-sellsword. "There's no ghost, I fear," he said as they made camp beneath the tallest tower. "No curse that can scare coin from a man's purse. We'll search at dawn." That night, the wind rose. The men huddled near their fires, the ruins creaking like old bones. The flames burned low, guttering in the drafts that whispered through the cracks of the fallen hall. Then they heard it. At first, it was only the sound of water, soft, slow, and steady, as though rain fell though the sky was clear. Then came a deeper sound, like the beating of wings far below the earth. Harwin stirred. "It's the lake," one of his men said nervously. "The wind stirs it sometimes." But there was no wind. When they went to the window, they saw the god's eye gleaming beneath the moon, still as a mirror. Yet something moved beneath the surface, a faint shimmer, silver as starlight. The youngest of them, a boy no older than 15, crossed himself. "My lord," he whispered, "they say the Silver Prince sleeps beneath those waters." Harwin spat. "Aemond Targaryen? Bah, let him sleep then. The dead have no claim on gold." But the boy kept staring, his face pale. "What if he wakes? Then he can keep the coin himself," the captain said, turning away. Before dawn, the boy was gone. They found his bedroll empty, his footprints leading down toward the shore. When the men followed, they saw the shape of him standing by the water's edge, gazing into the mist. He did not turn when they called. "Boy!" Harwin barked, striding forward. The lad lifted a hand as if to touch the lake's surface. Then, without sound, he stepped forward and vanished beneath the water. The men shouted and plunged after him, but the lake swallowed him whole. No ripple, no cry, only the cold, dark water staring back. When they returned to the hall, their faces were white as bone. None spoke for a long while. At last, Harwin muttered, "We ride at sunrise." But sunrise never came. A storm rolled in from the east, black and heavy, and by mid-morning, the castle was wrapped in fog. The men tried to leave, but their horses reared and refused the gates. The air grew thick, and the sky darkened to iron. That night, the sound came again, the slow, steady beat of unseen wings, and then they saw him. He stood in the courtyard, tall and pale, his armor wet as if from the deep. His hair was silver white, floating about him though there was no wind. One eye shone blue as sapphire, the other was a hollow void. In his hand, he held a sword that gleamed like moonlight on water. "By the Seven," whispered one man. "It's him." Aemond Targaryen turned his gaze upon them. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing no warmth, no breath, no life. Yet his voice, when he spoke, was calm and clear. "Who wakes the fire?" he asked. None answered. "Who calls me from the deep?" Still none dared speak. Aemond stepped forward, the sound of his boots hollow on the stones. "You come seeking gold," he said softly. "But gold is only ash, and ash returns to flame." Harwin found his voice. "We meant no harm, my prince. We sought only what was lost." Aemond's gaze lingered on him, cold as the grave. "Nothing that is lost here can be found," he said. "The curse sleeps beneath these stones, and now it wakes." The wind rose sharply, swirling dust around them. Vagar's roar echoed faintly in the distance. Impossible, for she had perished long ago. The men clutched their swords, but the air burned suddenly hot, and their steel glowed red in their hands. Aemond raised his sword. Its silver blade caught the firelight, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. "Begone," he said. "Tell them the dragon still remembers." Then he turned, and with each step he took, his form faded. The mist swallowed him. The wind stilled. The courtyard was empty again. By morning, Harrenhal was silent. Harwin Pike and his company fled before the sun rose, leaving their horses, their gold, and one of their men behind. When they reached the nearest village, they told their tale to the Septon, swearing never to return. But 2 days later, a farmer found their bodies on the road, burned where they stood, faces turned to the sky. No sign of fire touched the grass around them. Word spread quickly through the riverlands. Some said the prince had risen to guard his treasure. Others whispered that he sought something greater, vengeance for a war long past, or release from the curse that chained him to the deep. In King's Landing, the maesters dismissed the tale as peasant superstition. Yet one old scholar, blind and near to death, wrote quietly in his book, "The fire of Valyria does not die. It sleeps, and in sleeping, dreams of men. The dragons are gone, yet their shadow lingers. Beware the god's eye, for its mirror hides more than water. Beneath it, the silver prince waits still, bound by the flame that was his birthright and his doom." That winter, travelers along the god's eye told of strange lights once more, faint, glimmering shapes moving beneath the surface, like the beating of wings. And sometimes, when the moon was full, they swore they heard a voice rise from the water, deep and sorrowful, calling a single name to the dark. Vagar. Then silence. Only the rippling of the lake, smooth as glass, and the wind whispering over the reeds. The tale would pass into song again, as all things do in Westeros, of the prince who flew into the storm, and the dragon who would not die. Children would shiver to hear it, and old men would shake their heads, yet none would go near the god's eye at night. For in the stillness, when the world was quiet, the water gleamed faintly silver, and the air carried the scent of smoke. The curse had not ended, it merely waited for the next dreamer of fire. The years rolled on, and the tale of Aemond One-Eye faded from the tongues of maesters and bards alike. The war was long ended, the dragons dead, and the great houses turned their eyes to new quarrels. But though men forgot, the land did not. The god's eye kept its secrets. The wind that swept across its dark surface carried whispers still, low and mournful, like the echo of wings far below. In the time of King Aegon III, the Dragonbane, when no living dragon remained, there came to Harrenhal a young maester named Orwyn. He was a quiet man, newly chained, his hair the color of ash and his eyes sharp with hunger for knowledge. He had been sent by the citadel to catalog the ruins, to record the remnants of the strong line that once ruled there. The villagers warned him against it. "There's ghosts in them walls," an old fisherman told him as he crossed the causeway. "You'll hear the cries of the cursed if you listen by night, and if the wind turns cold, best you leave off your books and run." Orwyn smiled, as learned men do when peasants speak of ghosts. "There are no curses, goodman," he said kindly, "only the memories of men too long dead." The fisherman spat into the mud. "You'll learn otherwise, Meister." The great gates of Harrenhal stood open when he arrived, blackened iron corroded by rain. Inside, the courtyard lay empty save for crows and brambles. The walls loomed above him like cliffs, scarred and melted by dragonfire centuries old. He could smell the ruin. Wet stone, smoke, and something faintly metallic beneath it, like cold blood. His first night was uneventful. The wind moaned through broken towers, and the lake beyond lay calm beneath a waning moon. Orwyn took his supper by candlelight and began to write, his quill scratching upon parchment. "The curse of Harrenhal," he wrote, "is but the fancy of frightened men. The ruin's desolation springs not from magic, but from the folly of kings. Fire, stone, and time, these are the only ghosts that dwell here." Yet as he wrote, the candle flame trembled though the air was still. He looked up. For an instant he thought he saw a shape in the doorway, a tall figure, pale as frost, watching him. But when he blinked, the space was empty once more. He told himself it was a trick of shadow and returned to his notes. But when he dipped his quill again, the ink in his pot rippled as if stirred by unseen breath. That night, Orwyn dreamed. He walked through the halls of Harrenhal, though they were whole again, towers unbroken, banners flying, torches blazing. The sound of wings filled the air, vast and heavy, and a man stood before him clad in silver armor. His hair was white as winter's snow, and one eye shone with a sapphire light. "Do you seek truth, Maester?" the man asked, his voice echoing like a storm over water. Orwyn bowed his head. "Aye, my prince, I seek to understand." "Then understand this," said the silver-eyed man. "Some truths burn." When Orwyn woke, his chamber was cold. The fire had gone out, though he did not remember sleeping. Outside, the lake was covered in mist. The candle beside his bed had melted to nothing. On the wall above his desk, written in black upon the stone, were words he had not written. "The fire sleeps beneath." He fled to the courtyard, his heart pounding, but found no one. The marks were gone by the time he returned. Still, he stayed. The pull of knowledge was stronger than fear. He told himself it had been a dream, a lingering vision born of loneliness and the tales of peasants. Yet each night after, the dreams returned. Always, the man with the sapphire eye. Always, the whisper of wings. One evening, as the sun sank red over the god's eye, Orwyn walked down to the shore. The air smelled of rain, and the water glimmered faintly with the last light of day. He knelt and filled a small vial with lake water, intending to study it for trace minerals. But when he lifted it to the light, the water shimmered silver. The wind changed. He looked up and saw a figure standing on the surface of the lake. A man, tall and still, his armor glinting with light not of the sun. Aemond Targaryen. The maester could not move. His voice caught in his throat as the specter raised one hand. "Why do you wake what was buried?" The ghost said softly. "Do you hunger for flame as we once did?" "I seek only to learn," Orwyn whispered. The specter's gaze burned through him. "Then learn this. The fire of dragons is no gift. It consumes all it touches: blood, stone, memory. The curse is not in the lake, Meister. It is in you, and all who crave what was lost." The light flared, blinding him. When his sight cleared, the figure was gone. Orwyn stumbled back to the castle, shaking. He packed his things before dawn and fled Harrenhal, but he never reached the citadel. His horse was found days later on the road to Oldstones, the saddle empty. The saddlebags contained his journals, pages upon pages of notes written in a trembling hand. The final entry read, "I saw him, the prince beneath the lake. He waits for the world to remember fire. The curse endures. It does not hunger for vengeance, but for remembrance. The blood of dragons must burn again, or the silence will not hold." The maesters dismissed the account, calling it madness born of solitude. Yet no scholar has dwelt in Harrenhal since. The ravens avoid its towers, and the fishermen who pass the God's Eye at night still see faint glimmers beneath the surface, silver as the moon. Sometimes, when storms roll across the riverlands, they say a shadow flies within the clouds, vast and ancient, with wings that glint like metal. No thunder follows, only a long, low roar that echoes across the lake and fades into silence. And on those nights, the people bar their doors and whisper prayers, for they know the legend's truth. Aemond One-Eye still guards the waters, bound to the curse he carried in life. His soul and his dragon's flame are one, chained by the same sin, the blood of kin spilled beneath dragon fire. So the God's Eye sleeps deep and still, holding its secret in its depths. But now and then, the water ripples, silver against the moonlight, as if stirred by the beat of distant wings. For fire never dies, it only dreams. The snows came early to the riverlands that year, white and silent, burying the reeds along the God's Eye and turning the world to glass. Harrenhal slept beneath a blanket of frost, its blackened towers rising like the fingers of a dead hand from the whitened earth. The peasants said the castle was breathing again, that its windows glowed faintly at night, as though a fire burned in halls long empty. In the hamlet of Harrowfield, not 2 leagues from the lake, there lived a girl named Edda Rivers. Her father was a fisherman, her mother a washerwoman who died the past winter. Edda had never known dragons, only stories. She'd grown up hearing her grandmother whisper of Aemond One-Eye, the silver prince who fell into the God's Eye and never came out. They said his spirit still ruled the waters, and that when the moon was full, his dragon stirred beneath the waves. One night, Edda dreamed of him. She stood upon the frozen shore, the lake shining beneath the moon, smooth and pale as a mirror. In the dream, a shadow moved beneath the ice, vast, coiling, alive. Then a man's voice rose from the depths, soft and distant, calling her name. When she woke, she could still hear it. The next day, the weather turned strange. Though snow still fell upon the village, the wind blew warm from the lake, carrying the scent of ash. The fishermen found their nets empty, and one came running into town, pale and shaking. "There's light under the ice," he gasped. "A fire under the water." The Septon called it blasphemy, but by nightfall, half the village had gone to sea. Edda followed, drawn by a pull she could not name. When they reached the shore, they saw it, faint silver flames flickering beneath the ice, moving in circles like living things. Someone muttered a prayer to the seven. Another whispered, "The prince, the curse." Etta said nothing. Her heart beat hard against her ribs. The light seemed to pulse with her breath, as if answering her. That night, she dreamed again. The lake had thawed, and she stood upon the water itself, barefoot and unafraid. The silver light rose around her like mist. A figure approached, tall and silent, his armor gleaming as though forged of moonlight. One eye was a dark hollow, the other burned blue. "Why do you call to me?" she whispered. His voice was like the sound of deep water. "You have dragon's blood." She shook her head. "I am no Targaryen." "All men are the children of fire," he said. "Some have only forgotten the flame." He lifted his hand. Between them, the lake rippled. Beneath the surface, something stirred. A vast shadow, wings unfurling in the depths. "The curse sleeps," he said. "It needs a name to wake." When she woke, frost rimed her hair, and her breath hung white in the air. She lay not in her bed, but on the shore of the lake, the village lights flickering far behind her. The ice beneath her was warm. After that night, strange things began to happen. The snow melted in a circle around the god's eye, though winter still gripped the rest of the land. Ravens gathered on the roofs of the sept, their eyes bright as jet. And Etta, she began to dream while waking. She saw flashes, cities of fire, dragons in flight, men with silver hair and cruel smiles. Sometimes she heard the clash of steel, the roar of beasts long dead. When she blinked, the visions vanished, but their echo lingered in her bones. Her father grew frightened. "You've been touched by the curse," he told her. "You must leave this place." But she could not. The pull was too strong. It was as if the lake itself whispered to her, calling her by name in the dead of night. On the eve of the new moon, she went to the water once more. The ice had cracked in a great circle, and the air smelled of smoke. She knelt at the edge and saw her reflection flicker. Not her face, but his. Aemond's sapphire eye burned where hers should have been. "Why me?" she whispered. The voice came again, low and distant. "Because you are the spark. The flame must live on." The water shimmered, and a hand rose from beneath the surface, pale, ghostly, dripping with silver light. It reached for her, and though terror clawed at her chest, she did not draw back. She placed her hand in his. The cold vanished. The world dissolved into light. When she opened her eyes, she stood in a hall she had never seen before, a great chamber of stone and smoke, banners of black and red hanging from the walls. Firelight gleamed on suits of silver armor, and the air tasted of ash. At the far end of the hall sat a throne of fused swords. Upon it, a man with hair white as snow and eyes like molten silver. Etta fell to her knees. "Where am I?" The man's voice was deep and distant. "In the dream of dragons." He rose, his cloak trailing sparks. "Once we ruled the skies. Now we sleep beneath the earth forgotten. But you have woken us, child." "I don't understand." "You will," he said, "when the fire returns." The walls trembled. A roar filled the air. Vast, ancient, familiar. Etta turned to see the great shadow of a dragon rising behind the throne, its eyes twin stars of silver flame. The man's face wavered, and for an instant, she saw Aemond's reflection within it. The hall began to burn. She woke screaming on the shore. The lake was boiling, steam rising into the night. The villagers found her there at dawn, her eyes glazed with silver. She spoke no word, only whispered the same name again and again. Aemond. By dusk, the ice had melted entirely. The water shone with a light like moonfire, and beneath its surface, something vast moved. The Septon fled the village that night, crying that the doom had come again. When spring returned, Harrowfield was empty. The houses stood abandoned and the fields lay fallow. But travelers who passed by the God's Eye spoke of a figure walking the shore at twilight. A woman with hair pale as frost and eyes that gleamed like silver coins. Some said she sang to the water. Others swore she was speaking to someone unseen. And when storms gathered over the lake, they claimed to see two shapes rise from its depths, one great and winged, the other small and human, bound together by light. No man dared go near. So the story spread that the curse of Aemond Targaryen had found its vessel, and the dragon's fire had stirred again in mortal flesh. And beneath the God's Eye, the old prince dreamed once more, his voice mingling with hers, whispering across the dark waters. The fire never dies, it waits. Seasons passed, and the God's Eye grew restless. The mist that once clung gently to its waters now rolled across the shore in waves, thick and shimmering with silver light. No birds nested near its banks, no fish stirred beneath its surface. The Riverlanders whispered that the lake had become a living thing, breathing in the dark, waiting. Far from that haunted shore, word of strange portents reached King's Landing. The lords dismissed them as peasant tales, but the small folk spoke of a woman with hair white as snow wandering the riverlands by night, her eyes shining like moonlit steel. Some said she was a witch. Others called her the daughter of the drowned prince, born of the cursed waters. Few dared speak her name aloud, but those who did called her Edda of the Eye. One cold dawn, she came to Harrenhal. The castle loomed before her, vast and broken, its stones black as memory. Snow drifted through the cracks of its ruined towers, melting upon the faint warmth that seemed to seep from within. Edda felt that warmth in her bones, a familiar hum that pulsed beneath her skin like a heartbeat. She walked through the shattered gates without fear. Inside, the air shimmered faintly, heavy with old power. The great hall lay silent, but for the whisper of wind through the rafters. In the hearth, cold ashes glowed with a dull silver light. Edda knelt beside them. "I have come," she said softly. For a long moment, nothing answered. Then the air stirred. A faint sound rose from the shadows. A single step, slow and deliberate. He appeared as before, tall, armored, pale. His one sapphire eye burned with steady fire, his other a hollow void that swallowed the light. "Aemond," she whispered. He regarded her in silence. "You came because you were called." "I came because I cannot rest," she said. "The dreams will not stop." "They never do," he replied. "Not for those who have touched the flame." She rose to her feet. "Then tell me what it is you want from me." Aemond's gaze shifted toward the hearth. "Not from you, through you." The ashes flared, silver turning to white. For an instant, she saw not stone and ruin, but the memory of Valyria, its towers gleaming, dragons soaring across skies of fire. The heat seared her skin, yet she did not look away. "The fire of our line is not gone," Aemond said. "It sleeps, buried beneath blood and time. But you bear its spark. You will awaken it." "I am no queen," she said. He smiled faintly, though the gesture held no warmth. "Neither was I a king." The vision faded. Darkness returned. "Why me?" she asked again, her voice trembling. "Because the curse seeks balance," he said. "It is not vengeance that drives it, but hunger. The blood of dragons must burn again, else the world grows cold." He stepped closer. The air between them shimmered with heat. "Will you deny what you are?" Her hand trembled. Beneath her skin, light stirred. faint veins of silver tracing her fingers, pulsing in rhythm with her heart. "I don't know what I am," she said. "You are the bridge," he whispered, "between the living and the flame." He reached out, his gloved hand hovering near her face. "Look at me, Etta Rivers. See the truth." Their gazes met, and the hall vanished. She saw 1,000 memories. Aemond soaring above clouds of war, Vagar's roar shaking the earth, the fall into the god's eye, the endless darkness beneath. She saw his death, and yet he did not die. The dragon's fire bound him, chaining soul to flame, flesh to memory, and through that bond, she saw herself standing on the same shore, hand outstretched to the same ghost. The loop closed. When she tore her eyes away, she was shaking. "You would bind me as you are bound," she whispered. "The fire does not bind," he said softly. "It consumes, and through that, it frees." She turned away, her breath coming hard. "No, I will not be a ghost. Then you will be ash." The wind roared through the hall. The ashes in the hearth erupted into flame, silver white and blinding. The air grew thick with the scent of smoke and salt. Outside, the lake began to stir, waves crashing against the shore, though no wind blew. Etta raised her hands, the light beneath her skin flaring brighter. "If I must burn," she cried, "then I will choose the fire myself." Aemond watched her without moving. So did I. The flames leapt higher, coiling around her like serpents. The light spread through the hall, crawling along the walls, up the ruined towers, until Harrenhal itself seemed to glow. From miles away, travelers saw it. The black fortress wreathed in silver fire, its reflection burning upon the waters of the god's eye. Some fell to their knees and prayed. Others fled. When the light faded, the castle stood silent once more. The snow melted in a wide circle around its base, and the air smelled faintly of rain and salt. Of Etta, there was no sign. Yet those who ventured near swore that the lake had changed. Its surface no longer lay still. It shimmered faintly, as though light lived beneath it. And sometimes, in the moonlight, 2 shapes could be seen gliding below. A dragon vast as mountains, and beside it, a figure slender and human, their hand upon its neck. The maesters would later record the event in dry ink and colder words. An unexplained illumination at Harrenhal, accompanied by tremors and the melting of surrounding frost. No natural cause determined. But the Riverlands remembered differently. They said the silver fire had passed from prince to maiden, from the drowned to the dreaming, and that together they now guarded the lake's depths. Children born near the god's eye were said to carry flecks of pale silver in their eyes. Some could hear faint whispers in the rain. Others dreamed of wings. And when storms rolled in from the east, bringing lightning and wind, the old ones would close their shutters and speak the same words. Fire calls to fire, the curse flies still. Then, as thunder rolled across the water, they would hear it faintly, a roar rising from the depths, the echo of ancient wings stirring once more beneath the surface. Some swore they saw light flash across the clouds, not white but silver, sweeping across the heavens like a comet, and for an instant, before the storm swallowed it whole, they saw 2 figures riding the wind, one crowned in flame, the other in moonlight, bound forever by the fire that neither life nor death could tame. The god's eye gleamed beneath them, eternal and watchful, its heart pulsing with silver fire, and the world below, as always, forgot. Spring crept across the Riverlands, though few dared to call it gentle. The god's eye steamed beneath the sun as if holding its own secret season. The villagers who remained nearby spoke of nights where the moon turned pale red and the air shimmered above the waters like heat above stone. They whispered that the curse had woken once more, that the drowned prince and the silver maiden rode together beneath the waves, dreaming of fire and sky. Most who heard such tales dismissed them with a muttered prayer and a spit for luck. Yet there are always some who are drawn to the forbidden, as moths to a candle's edge. One such soul was Sir Marston Lannet, a hedge knight fallen on poor days. His sword was sharp, but his purse was thin, and his pride thinner still. He had served many banners, and lost under most. When rumor reached him of a hidden hoard at Harrenhal, a treasure left from the days of dragon lords, he laughed and said, "If ghosts guard it, they may yet pity a hungry man." He rode for the lake before dawn. The castle greeted him in silence. The air above the courtyard felt heavy, as though weighed by breath unseen. Snowmelt ran through cracks in the stone like veins of quicksilver. His horse balked at the gates and refused to pass. Marston dismounted, cursing softly, and crossed alone. Inside, the stillness was deep enough to drown in. His boots left prints in dust untouched by man for years. Above him, ravens perched in the rafters, their eyes glinting like black gems. He found the great hall much as the tales described, vast, broken, its hearth long cold. Yet the stones themselves seemed to shimmer faintly, as if reflecting a light that was not there. In the ashes, he saw the print of a woman's foot, small and bare, fresh, though no one had walked that path for years. "Edda," he murmured, half mocking, half awed. The name echoed strangely, returning from the far corners of the hall. "Edda, Edda," until it faded like breath upon glass. He laughed then, to break the silence. "No ghost will scare me from gold." But even as he spoke, the air turned cold. The laughter died in his throat. A voice came from the darkness, low and clear. "Gold is the first curse of men." He spun, hand to hilt. A figure stepped from the shadows. She was tall, pale as snow, her hair falling loose about her shoulders. Her eyes were bright silver, and when she looked at him, he felt as though she saw straight through to the flame of his soul. "Who are you?" he demanded. She regarded him without fear. "One who remembers." Marston swallowed. "If you're flesh and not spirit, you'll stay your riddles. I've come for the treasure said to lie beneath this keep." Her lips curved faintly, a smile both pitying and sad. "Treasure? Yes, there is treasure here, but not of the kind you seek." He hesitated, his greed warring with unease. "Show me then." She turned and began to walk toward the far end of the hall. He followed, his sword drawn but lowered. Her steps made no sound on the stone. At the wall's base, she stopped before a great crack that ran from floor to ceiling, wide enough for a man to pass. "Down there," she said softly. Marston peered into the darkness. He saw a staircase descending into blackness, the air thick with heat and the scent of iron. He lit a torch and started down. The woman did not follow. The stairs twisted endlessly. The deeper he went, the louder grew a faint sound, like the beating of a distant heart. The walls gleamed faintly, wet and red. At last, he came upon a cavern vast as a cathedral. The floor was smooth as glass, reflecting his torchlight 100-fold, and at its center lay water, perfectly still. Beneath it, something glimmered. Treasure indeed, piles of gold and silver, crowns and armor, blades that shone like stars. Marston gasped. He waded forward, the water lapping at his boots. When he reached the center, his torch flickered. The reflection staring back at him was not his own. A single sapphire eye gleamed up from the depths. Then the surface broke, A hand shot from the water. Cold, pale, strong. It seized his wrist and pulled. He screamed, thrashing, but the water swallowed his cry. He glimpsed a face rising to meet him, half shadow, half flame. The face of Aemond Targaryen, ageless, eyes burning with silver fire. "Gold is ash," the prince's voice thundered through the cavern, "and ash returns to the flame." Marston felt his flesh burn, though no heat touched him. The torch went out. The last thing he saw was the reflection of the woman above, her silver eyes watching in silence as the water closed over him. When dawn came, Harrenhal stood quiet once more. Only the faintest scent of smoke lingered. The villagers who dared to approach found a stranger's horse tied at the gate, but no rider. In the courtyard, the stones were warm beneath their feet, though the air was cold. That night, the lake glowed again. A faint circle of light rippled across its surface, silver at first, then red, then fading to black. The old fisherman who had once warned Maester Orwyn saw it from his hut. He shook his head and whispered, "Another taken. The curse feeds." But this time, the fire did not fade entirely. In the days that followed, the mists that hung over the god's eye grew thick and restless. They rose higher each morning, curling like smoke from a pyre. Some said the light beneath the waters had changed, no longer soft and silver, but streaked with red, as though the fire now dreamed of blood. In the ruins of Harrenhal, a new sound could be heard, the clash of steel upon stone, faint and rhythmic, as if ghostly hands forged something deep below. The peasants fled the nearby fields, leaving the land barren once more. And yet, in the highest tower, travelers swore they saw a light burning by night, a pale figure at the window, her hair bright as moonfire, staring toward the lake. They said she was waiting. For what? None could say. Some claimed the drowned prince had found his heir, that the Silver Maiden now bore the fire of both. Others whispered that she was building something in the dark, a gate for the dragon's return, a bridge between the living and the flame. And still the god's eye stirred, restless beneath its shroud. One evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, the mists parted for a heartbeat. A witness on the road to Harrentown swore he saw it then. Two figures standing upon the lake's surface, one armored in silver, one clothed in white. Between them burned a flame that neither wind nor water could quench. Then the storm broke, and the vision vanished. But for nights after, the rain that fell upon the riverlands tasted faintly of salt and ash, and when lightning split the heavens, the people below saw the faint outline of wings etched in the clouds, vast and bright and terrible. The Meisters called it weather, the small folk called it omen, and the old ones, those who remembered, whispered the truth to their hearths. The curse of the dragon is not death, it is return. The fire sleeps, but it dreams of flight. The storm that had swept across the riverlands lingered for 7 days, and when at last it broke, the god's eye was veiled in fog so thick that even the nearest shore could not be seen. The lake was silent, but beneath its stillness pulsed a strange heat, faint yet alive, as though a heartbeat far below the depths. The peasants who lived along the banks had fled or perished. Only a handful of fisherfolk remained, old and half-mad, claiming that to leave was to anger the spirits who ruled the water. They spoke to the lake as if it could hear them, leaving offerings of bread and salt, whispering prayers to the Silver Queen who guarded the drowned prince's slumber. None among them knew her name, yet all knew her shadow. On the 8th night after the storm, a boy from Harrentown, young Bran of the Mill, set out alone across the shore. His sister had vanished weeks past, and he swore he had seen her face in the fog, calling to him from the water. The townsfolk warned him, begged him not to go, but grief and madness share one bed. The boy carried a torch and a prayer. He reached the edge of the lake as the moon broke through the mist, casting the world in silver light. The water lay calm before him, its surface reflecting the sky so perfectly that he could not tell where one ended and the other began. "Elsa?" he whispered. At first there was only silence, then a ripple disturbed the mirror of the lake, slow and deliberate. The mist parted. A woman stood upon the water. Her gown was white as frost, her hair falling about her shoulders like molten silver. Her eyes glowed faintly, as if lit from within. She smiled, and in that smile the boy saw both comfort and sorrow. "Elsa," he said again, though he knew this was no sister of his. "Come," she whispered, her voice like the wind through reeds. The torch in his hand sputtered and died. Yet still he walked forward, his feet finding purchase where none should be. Step by step he crossed the glassy surface until he stood before her. The woman reached out and touched his cheek. Her hand was cool as moonlight. "The fire remembers," she said softly, "and through you it wakes." The boy's eyes widened. Silver light flared within them, bright and pure. His body trembled once, and then stilled. When the fog rolled back in, both were gone. By dawn, the lake steamed again. That same morning, a column of knights passed the southern shore on their way to King's Landing. Among them rode Sir Garin Mouton, a veteran of the Stepstones and no man of fancy. Yet even he crossed himself when he saw what lay upon the water, a thin line of light stretching from one side of the lake to the other, bright as molten metal. He swore later it was not reflection but flame, burning upon the surface without smoke or sound. The maesters in their towers heard his tale and wrote it down with weary quills. "The Lake of the God's Eye," one recorded, "continues to yield reports of unnatural phenomena, almost certainly the product of mists and marsh gases. Yet none could explain the warmth that spread across the riverlands that spring, melting the snows weeks early. The farmers rejoiced at first, for their crops grew quick and tall. But then came the fires. Entire fields burst into flame under cloudless skies. The Septons declared it punishment for forgotten sins. The small folk whispered another word: dragons. At Harrenhal, the black towers glowed faintly at night, and from their highest window shone a pale light, as if a candle burned behind the stones. Travelers who camped nearby swore they saw shadows moving against the flame. Two shapes, one tall and armored, the other slender and cloaked, standing side by side. The more learned said it was illusion. The brave said it was love. The fearful said it was a warning. Among the fearful was Maester Piran, who served the lord of House Harroway. He sent ravens to Old Town, begging permission to study the phenomena. His request was granted, though none envied him the task. He arrived at Harrenhal on the first day of summer. The air shimmered with heat, though no sun pierced the mist. Piran set his camp within the outer yard, scribbling notes and muttering to himself about natural vapors and chemical fire. On the second night, he dreamed of dragons. They flew in endless circles above the lake, their scales flashing like stars. Beneath them, the water burned, and from its heart rose a figure with hair of silver and eyes like flame. When she spoke, the sky itself seemed to bend toward her. "Why do you measure what cannot be measured?" she asked. Piran stammered in his dream. "I seek to understand." Her expression was kind, but her words were not. Understanding is the first step toward ruin. He woke gasping. His tent was filled with light, white, cold and silent. It faded when he blinked, leaving behind only the smell of ash. By morning, he had packed his instruments and fled. The masters later found his writings, half burned, half mad. One passage alone remained legible. The curse does not sleep. It dreams through the living. The fire seeks a vessel, and when it finds one, it will fly again. In the years that followed, tales spread of children born near the god's eye with strange eyes, pale and gleaming like polished steel. They were quiet children, watchful, and when storms passed overhead, they lifted their faces to the rain and smiled. The Septons feared them. The old ones whispered that these were the Silver Prince's kin, the children of his curse. Time, as it always does, dulled fear into legend. The children grew, their blood scattered, their names forgotten. But the lake endured. Even now, it broods in silence, the mirror of the world. When the moon is full, those who linger upon its shore swear they hear wings beating beneath the surface, slow and heavy, as though a great beast dreams far below. Sometimes they glimpse a figure walking the mist, a woman cloaked in white, her eyes reflecting both grief and power. They say she guards what remains of the dragon flame, that she waits for the world to need it again. And on the rare nights when storm clouds roll over the riverlands and the sky breaks with fire, men and women alike fall to their knees, for in the heart of the lightning they see two shapes soaring above the clouds, one shadowed in silver, one bright as moonlight. Then they remember the old words, whispered from mother to child since the days of the dance. Fire does not die, it waits. And the god's eye, restless in its eternal slumber, glows faintly in answer, silver light rippling across its depths, as though smiling at the folly of men who believe the age of dragons is done. Autumn came soft and gray, laying its breath across the riverlands. The fields bowed under gold and dying grain, the air cool and full of mist that clung to the earth until midday. In the small villages scattered along the god's eye, the folk spoke in low voices once more, for strange things had begun to stir with the turning of the year. Cattle were found burned in their pens without flame or smoke. The waters of the lake sometimes glowed beneath the moon, red as blood, and children born that season came into the world with pale hair and eyes like molten silver. The Septons prayed, the maesters measured, but the small folk simply said, "The fire is waking again." In Oldstones, that ancient ruin above the Trident, a sellsword named Corin Pike sat by a dying hearth. He had been many things in his years, a knight without banner, a thief, a wanderer, and had known enough ghosts to recognize when one called his name. For 7 nights, his dreams had been haunted by a voice, low and steady as the beating of the tide, whispering from the east. "Come," it said, "the prince remembers." On the 8th night, Corin saddled his horse and rode for the god's eye. The mists grew thicker as he neared the lake. The air shimmered faintly, carrying the scent of salt and smoke, though the sea lay many leagues away. He passed no man on the road, though once he thought he saw a figure in white watching from the trees, tall and still, her hair flowing like light through water. When he turned, she was gone. He reached Harrenhal by dusk. The ruins loomed vast and silent, the last rays of sun painting its scorched stones the color of old blood. Crows circled the highest tower, their cries echoing like laughter. He dismounted at the gate. The ground was warm beneath his boots. Inside the walls, the silence felt alive. His every footstep came back to him twice over, as though another walked beside him in the shadows. At the heart of the yard stood a pool, small and dark, fed by a trickle from the lake. Its surface shone faintly, a mirror to the dying light. Corin knelt beside it, touching the water with his gloved hand. The surface rippled. A voice rose from the depths, quiet yet clear. "Do you know why you were called?" He froze. The voice was a man's, measured, cold, and ancient. He looked up, and there, across the pool, stood Aemond Targaryen. His armor was the color of the moon, his cloak dark as storm clouds. One eye gleamed blue as sapphire, the other an empty shadow. Corin bowed his head without meaning to. "My prince," he murmured, though his tongue felt strange in his mouth. Aemond studied him in silence. "You carry the scent of battle," he said at last. "The world above still burns, does it not?" Corin nodded. "There is war enough for any man who seeks it." "War," Aemond repeated, as if tasting the word. "It is the oldest prayer of men. They burn and call it faith." He moved closer. The water at his feet stirred, though he left no print upon the stone. "You are drawn here because you remember, even if you do not know it. The blood within you remembers." Corin frowned. "I have no dragon's blood." Aemond's mouth curved faintly. "All who dream of flame share its spark." Before Corin could speak again, the air grew thick. A wind rose from nowhere, carrying with it the scent of rain and iron. The pool began to glow, pale silver spreading across its surface. From its depths came another figure, a woman, her hair bright as snow, her eyes endless and sorrowful. Edda. She stood beside the prince, her hand resting lightly upon his arm. "You called another," she said softly. "The world turns," Aemond answered. "It forgets too easily. The fire must be remembered." Her gaze fell on Corin. "Do you fear death?" He hesitated. "I've met it often enough. Why should I fear it now?" "Then you are ready." Before he could move, she raised her hand. The silver light flared, swallowing the world. Corin gasped and found himself standing no longer in the ruins, but above them, in the sky itself. The clouds churned beneath his feet like waves. Around him stretched a vast expanse of silver flame. Within it soared dragons, great and terrible, their wings beating soundlessly through the endless light. At the center of the fire, he saw Aemond astride Vhagar, the dragon's scales glinting like molten steel. Edda rode beside them, her white hair streaming in the wind, her eyes fixed upon him. "Do you see?" she said. "The fire never dies. It only seeks new flesh." The dragons roared, and the sound became the roar of thunder. The world burned, and then suddenly, it was gone. Corin awoke beside the pool, his breath shallow, the night silent around him. The lake lay still once more, the stars bright upon its surface. Yet his hand still burned. When he uncurled his fingers, a mark shone upon his palm, a dragon's eye, silver and blue, faint but living. He left Harrenhal before dawn, but the fire followed him. Wherever he went thereafter, storms broke in his wake. His dreams were filled with wings and the whisper of Aemond's voice. The curse is not the fire. The curse is forgetting. Years later, the Riverlanders spoke of a knight who wandered the land, his sword gleaming with strange light, his eyes silver in the dark. He never raised blade against man or beast save to defend the innocent. When he fought, lightning fell from the sky, and the smell of ash lingered long after. They called him the Storm Knight, the last of the dragon's blood. Some said he was blessed, others cursed, but all agreed on one thing. Wherever he rode, the god's eye glowed faintly brighter. And in Harrenhal's tallest tower, a single window burned with pale fire each night, as if watching him from afar. When he vanished at last, swallowed by the mists, the peasants whispered that he had returned to the lake, to the Silver Prince and his pale queen, to the dream that bound them all. So the story turned another circle, as stories always do. The maesters wrote of strange weather, of heat that lingered in the earth, of children born beneath crimson moons. The small folk spoke instead of the fire that walks in mortal skin, of the prince who waits, and the woman who guards his flame. And when the mists rise from the god's eye, and the water gleams like silver glass, they say the curse breathes anew, whispering its old promise across the still air. Fire does not end, fire remembers. Winter crept down from the north again, iron and relentless. The fields of the riverlands froze hard, and the reeds about the god's eye stood stiff as spears. Harrenhal rose black above the white plain, its towers sheathed in frost, its windows hollow and dark as sockets in a skull. Yet by night, a faint glow still pulsed behind its tallest window, like a heartbeat of light that refused to die. The villagers no longer came near. They had learned to live with their fear as one might live beside a sleeping beast. From afar, they watched the fog drift over the lake, and when thunder muttered in a clear sky, they crossed themselves and whispered of the prince beneath the waters. But there are always those who do not fear legends. In the 43rd year after the dance, when King Aegon III had long turned to dust, a raven arrived in Old Town, bearing news that chilled even the maesters' calm hearts. The god's eye, it said, had begun to steam in the dead of winter. Ice melted from its surface, though the air was frozen. The fishermen swore the water itself breathed, rising and falling as though a giant heart beat beneath. The citadel sent Maester Theomar to see the truth. He was an old man, near blind from ink and candle smoke, yet his mind was sharp as any blade. Theomar had studied the tales of Aemond One-Eye since youth and dismissed them as fancy. But when the High Archmaester placed the sealed letter in his hands, he felt the faintest flicker of unease. 3 weeks later, he stood upon the frozen road that wound toward Harrenhal, the lake stretching vast and gray to his right. The wind cut through his furs, smelling of brine and ash. His escort, 5 sworn swords of House Mooten, kept their eyes on the ground, muttering prayers as they rode. When the castle came into view, Theomar understood why. A column of smoke rose from its tallest tower, not black, but silver-white, glimmering like metal in the sun. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if heated from within. Even the snow near the walls had melted, revealing black, scorched earth beneath. They made camp by the outer gate, for none dared enter. At dusk, Theomar took his walking stick and climbed alone to the courtyard. The stones were warm under his boots. He knelt and placed his hand against the ground. It pulsed faintly, like something living. "Impossible," he murmured. A whisper answered him. "Nothing of fire is impossible." The old man froze. The voice was soft, female, and close. Yet when he turned, there was only fog. "Who speaks?" he demanded. The mist thickened, taking form. A woman stepped from it, tall and pale, her hair shining like the moon. Her eyes were silver mirrors, reflecting his own face. "Edda of the Eye," he breathed. She smiled faintly. So they still remember the name. Theomar steadied himself on his stick. "Are you ghost or sorcery?" "Both," she said, "and neither. I am memory made flesh, the flame that dreams." He swallowed hard. "If you are memory, tell me, what is this place now? What stirs beneath?" "The past," she said simply, "and what the past demands." Behind her, the air rippled. From the fog rose another figure, armored and tall, his sapphire eye burning with quiet fire. Aemond Targaryen. Theomar's breath caught. Every tale, every song, every whispered rumor stood before him in flesh made light. "My prince," he whispered. Aemond's gaze fell upon him. "You come seeking knowledge," he said, his voice low and even. "But knowledge is a door that cannot be closed once opened. The masters have sought to bind the world in chains of reason, yet reason cannot bind flame." "I seek only truth," Theomar said. "Then look," Aemond replied. The ground trembled, the mist lifted, and the lake beyond the walls flared with silver fire. Waves rose without wind, and from the depths a shape began to emerge. Vast, coiling, immense. Vhagar. The old dragon rose from the water like a mountain taking breath, her scales gleaming with light, her eyes twin stars burning through centuries of darkness. Theomar fell to his knees, tears freezing on his cheeks. "She lives," he gasped. "Not lives," Edda said gently. "Remembers. We all remember." Theomar watched as the dragon spread her wings. They dripped water that turned to mist in the air. Her roar shook the clouds, a sound that had not been heard since the doom itself. "Why show me this?" he whispered. "Because the world forgets," Aemond said. "Men build walls of stone and call them kingdoms, but fire needs no walls. It waits only for breath to awaken it." Edda turned her gaze upon the maester, and her voice softened. "Tell them when you return. Tell them that the curse is not wrath. It is remembrance. When men forget what fire can do, it must remind them." The light brightened until Theomar could see nothing but white. When he woke, he was lying on the frozen road outside the gates. His escort found him at dawn, pale and trembling. He spoke little on the journey back, and less still after returning to Old Town. The report he submitted to the citadel was short, written in a shaking hand. "The lake breathes. The dragon sleeps. The fire endures." He died a month later, and his writings were sealed. Yet copies found their way to the hands of others, to dreamers, to fools, to those who listened when thunder spoke. In the decades that followed, travelers along the God's Eye still told of strange sights. Lights beneath the water, shadows moving within the fog, the echo of wings in a windless sky. Sometimes, a rider claimed to see two shapes soaring high above the clouds, glinting silver in the moonlight. When storms rolled in from the east, the farmers of the riverlands would hurry to their homes and whisper to their children, "The prince and his lady ride tonight. Keep your hearths cold." And when the storm passed, the air would smell faintly of smoke and salt. Now and then, a single spark would fall from the sky, striking the ground without sound. Where it landed, grass would grow silver for a season before fading back to green. So the tale of Aemond Targaryen, the Silver Curse, did not end. It lived in the restless water, in the blood of children who dreamed of wings, in the hearts of men who could not forget fire. The God's Eye keeps its secret still. But when the night is very quiet and the moon rides high, the lake gleams faintly with light that is not of stars. And somewhere beneath that mirrored surface, a prince with one sapphire eye opens his hand, and beside him stands a woman of silver flame. Together they whisper to the depths, to the sky, to the world that once belonged to dragons. "We are the memory. We are the fire, and the fire never dies."